Have you ever wondered how much loyalty costs, if it can even be bought at all? In my world, everything had a price. Efficiency, innovation, silence. Over 2 decades, I built a tech empire worth billions by mastering the fine art of negotiation. Investors called me a visionary. The media branded me a disruptor. But the one deal I never thought I'd have to make was with betrayal itself. My name is Julian Mercer. 44 years old. Founder and CEO of Atlas OS, the cloud backbone behind half of Silicon Valley. I wasn't just successful, I was untouchable. Or so I believed. Then came the message. Just 3 words from the man I once trusted more than my own shadow. After that, nothing was the same. This isn't a story about cheating, or even greed. Not really. It's about what happens when the people closest to you forget how you became the man they tried to destroy. When they mistake patience for weakness, kindness for blindness, and what happens when a builder turns into a strategist. You'll hear about betrayal, yes, but more importantly, you'll learn what I did next. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't fury, it's clarity, and clarity, when wielded with precision, is the most dangerous weapon of all. I didn't inherit my success. I built it, line by line of code, pitch by pitch, night after night spent awake while others slept comfortably on the illusion of job security. Atlas OS began in the corner of my rented apartment in Palo Alto, surrounded by takeout boxes and the faint glow of a second-hand monitor. The world didn't need another cloud solution, it needed a faster one, a more secure one that could scale without blinking. I gave it that, and it gave me back the kind of life most people only read about. My penthouse in San Francisco faced the bay, floor-to-ceiling glass reflecting the skyline like a promise kept. There were weeks I traveled from Hong Kong to Munich, to Dubai without touching the same time zone twice. I didn't build a company, I built infrastructure for the next digital century. But what made it feel real wasn't the boardrooms or the billions, it was the people I'd brought with me. At the center of that circle was Damon Wells, my co-founder, my college roommate from MIT, the guy who once pulled me out of a blackout during finals and stayed up all night to finish my neural net prototype just because he believed in it. Damon was sharp, loyal, and funny in a way that made venture capitalists feel like they were being invited to something cooler than a pitch. It felt like joining a movement. When we launched Atlas OS, it was just the 2 of us and a dream. Within 5 years, we had scaled to 300 employees, landed 5 Fortune 100 clients, and were featured on the cover of Wired. By the 10th year, we were valued at over $4 billion. With Damon overseeing our architecture and me steering strategy, it felt like nothing could touch us. And then there was Celeste. I met her at an art auction in Paris. She stood beside a Rothko, not looking at the canvas but through it, like she could see the emotion behind the brushwork. There was elegance in her presence but also control. Celeste had grown up moving between Monaco, Milan, and Marrakesh, the only daughter of a diplomat and a gallerist. She spoke 5 languages, understood power dynamics better than any board member I'd met, and somehow made the sharpness of intelligence look like style. We were married 2 years later in Tuscany, beneath olive trees and late summer light. She became the curator of our life, selecting furniture, wines, charities, the color of the pool tiles in Lake Tahoe. She didn't just fit into my world, she refined it. The 3 of us, Celeste, Damon, and I, were inseparable. She once joked that she had married both of us, and I remember laughing, not realizing then how close to the truth that would become. On paper, I had everything: a trusted partner in business, a stunning wife who moved through society like a diplomat, and enough capital to ensure my great-grandchildren would never need to pitch a single idea. But wealth breeds comfort, and comfort, I've learned, is where danger grows quietly. I was so focused on building the next version of Atlas OS, the distributed AI module that would transform edge computing, that I didn't notice what was slipping through the cracks of my perfect narrative. Late meetings between Damon and Celeste, about an art tech collaboration, flight records that started to look eerily aligned, private investor dinners I wasn't invited to, but at the time, I explained it all away. You don't question the foundation while you're still climbing the tower. You don't suspect betrayal from the very hands that helped you reach the top. Looking back, the signs weren't subtle. They were sophisticated. That's how betrayal happens at this level. No screaming matches, no lipstick on a collar, just patterns. Tiny, repeating signals that only become obvious when you're already too far in. It started with Celeste canceling dinners. First it was a migraine, then a last-minute gala, then just silence, her side of the bed cool well past midnight. She was always in motion, gallery previews, foundation meetings, overseas art fairs, but now there was a certain choreography to it, a deliberate rhythm. When I asked about her trip to London, she said it was with 2 collectors. But I'd overheard her say something about Zurich. That's when the timeline started not to match. I noticed the smallest things, how her perfume would linger just faintly in the foyer after she'd supposedly been gone all day, how she no longer showed interest in quarterly reports, how she never asked what cities I'd been in last week. We were still married, but she'd stopped being my confidant. With Damon, the shift was even more quiet, eerily so. He'd always been fastidious about communication, the kind of CTO who replied to Slack messages with bullet points and GitHub links. Lately, replies took hours, days. He started closing off projects for my oversight, citing security compartmentalization as if I were just another stakeholder, not the man who wrote the first 10,000 lines of our kernel. I'd come into meetings and find topics already resolved, investors already briefed, legal already looped in, without me. When I asked him about a proposed pivot to a decentralized B2B framework, he said, "Oh, I thought we discussed this last week," even though we hadn't. There were whole conversations happening just beyond my line of sight. What really caught me was the synergy. They began to mirror each other. The same phrases, the same justifications. It's a new paradigm. We need optionality. Celeste started referring to Atlas OS as the company, not your company. Damon started showing up at the same European cities where Celeste's art shows happened to be, even though we had no clients there. I told myself I was overthinking it. That paranoia was a luxury for people who hadn't spent 15 years building their legacy from scratch. But then came the email. A glitch in our internal comms system forced my assistant to forward me a flagged Slack export. Just a formality. And there it was. A thread marked private, opened between Damon and an anonymous handle, later confirmed to be Celeste's secondary email. They weren't flirting, they were forecasting. I read phrases like board control, trust restructuring, Julian's not paying attention. I didn't finish the thread that night. I just sat there, staring at my screen, not even blinking. It wasn't heartbreak, not yet. It was data, evidence, proof that I was no longer paranoid. I was targeted. Betrayed, not for love, but for leverage. They weren't running away together. They were preparing to run me out. I closed my laptop without a sound and poured myself a drink I didn't touch. In that moment, I felt something cold, something distant, something not entirely human rise. Inside me. Not anger, not revenge, just resolve. They wanted to see how far they could go before I noticed. What they didn't know was that I had noticed. And now, I was watching. The night I confirmed everything, it wasn't with a dramatic confrontation or some cinematic breakdown. It was quiet, like most endings are. I had canceled a scheduled trip to Tel Aviv for a keynote address, telling the team I needed a mental reset. What I really needed was to observe the storm I sensed brewing just beneath the polished surface of my life. I told no one I was staying in town, no driver, no assistant, no itinerary in the calendar. I simply took my own car, something I hadn't done in months, and drove home earlier than expected, just past 7. I parked around the block, the city already turning to dusk, and walked up the back alley to my own security gate, entering through the side kitchen door. The lights were on. The place smelled like her perfume, amber and sandalwood, and I heard laughter. Soft, familiar. I stood in the hallway, just out of view, as Celeste passed through the living room. She wasn't alone. Damon's voice carried through the open floor plan. Calm, confident, almost rehearsed. I didn't go in. I didn't make a scene. I turned around and left, unnoticed, and drove to the Atlas office. Our top floor was dark, the cleaning crew long gone. I sat in my chair, the one I'd chosen myself during the Series A expansion, and opened a secure channel on my laptop. I wasn't angry. I was focused. Because now I knew. And knowing meant I could begin to build the counterattack. Over the next 48 hours, I took inventory, not just of emotions, but of assets. Legal, digital, psychological. First, I traced travel logs. Damon's jet account, company-funded of course, matched Celeste's so precisely it was laughable. From Milan to Singapore to a supposed Zurich investor summit that never happened. The timestamps were identical. I pulled IP logs from her supposed Art Foundation's website, hosted from Atlas servers, as a favor to her. The admin account had been accessed from Damon's IP address multiple times over the past 2 months. That night I entered her passcode while she slept, barely breathing beside me. I knew it already, her mother's birthday. I opened her secure messaging app and saw the full extent of it. Encrypted threads where she and Damon planned to push me out of Atlas through a boardroom maneuver using shell companies and dormant investor. Proxies Damon had revived. They were planning a coup, not a romance. And in a strange way that made it worse. There's something easier about the idea of being replaced emotionally, but to be discarded logically, to be calculated out of your own empire as a liability, that wounds something deeper than the heart. It wounds identity. They had filed paperwork in the Cayman Islands to create a trust that would be used to vote me out of majority control in the next board session. The mechanism was brilliant. Cold. They weren't stealing the company. They were reshaping it from within, using my own tools, my own infrastructure. Damon had even signed technical documents, moving portions of our IP to a research subdivision he conveniently chaired. Celeste had begun shifting assets in our joint accounts to her name through a complex art-backed loan structure that I hadn't noticed. Until I did. But they had made one critical mistake. They thought I was still the version of Julian Mercer, who believed in shared visions, who wanted to play the long game of legacy and trust. What they failed to understand was that I had built Atlas with sleepless nights and legal paranoia, and I had quietly embedded protective architecture into the company's DNA from the very beginning, including a clause that no one remembered, not even Damon, because it had been inserted at the pre-seed stage and buried under a mountain of legal minutiae. Founders Clause Article 9. Triggered by breach of fiduciary intent or material dishonesty, it gave the original founder unilateral rights to dissolve executive positions under confidentiality breach. And now, I had enough proof to light that clause on fire. I've always believed revenge is a byproduct. You don't chase it. You construct it. Quietly, methodically, like a machine built to fit its target so precisely that when it moves there's no friction, just inevitability. That night, after confirming the full scope of their betrayal, I didn't rage or spiral. I opened my private contacts folder and called the one person I kept for emergencies I hoped I'd never face. Sasha Kim. Sasha wasn't a traditional lawyer. She had started as an intelligence analyst in Seoul, then moved into crisis litigation. For global firms that preferred to solve problems before they became headlines. She operated out of an unmarked floor in a building that didn't show up on Google Maps. By the time I arrived the next morning, she already had my NDA signed and coffee ready. I handed her the compiled digital evidence, access logs, encrypted, chat threads, trust filings, and watched her expression shift only once when she saw the offshore structure's timeline. "They've been planning this for nearly a year," she said, more as an assessment than a judgment. "We spent hours inside that soundproof office. No phones, no assistants, just strategy." Sasha confirmed my legal instincts were right. Founders. Clause Article 9 was still enforceable under Delaware law, and the board had no awareness of it because it had never been invoked. Better yet, it was protected under corporate confidentiality, meaning the moment I triggered it, Damon and any complicit parties would be temporarily suspended from all operational functions until an internal hearing. That gave me a window, a narrow one, to act before they suspected anything. Our first move was securing the core. I transferred the Atlas OS patents into a subsidiary I had quietly maintained for years, CoreSpan LLC, technically separate, fully owned by me, and structured as an intellectual property licensing entity. Within 24 hours, every AI optimization algorithm and predictive load balancing script was under CoreSpan's umbrella. Without those, Atlas OS wasn't special. Damon wouldn't even see the shift. It would look like a routine intra-company licensing agreement until it was too late. Next came financial containment. Celeste had started redirecting shared marital assets under the pretense of an art foundation acquisition, but her structure was sloppy, likely rushed. Sasha's forensic accountant traced the loan-back strategy to a Luxembourg account registered under her secondary passport. The foundation's board included a name I recognized, an old friend of her father's who had been blacklisted from the Sotheby's inner circle after a forgery scandal. We prepared a freeze order for any attempt to leverage our shared holdings into foreign-backed instruments, knowing full well she'd try to liquidate when she realized the ground was shifting. Then came the psychological component. I needed Damon to stay unaware, complacent. So I kept up appearances. I praised his efforts during our quarterly product review. I approved his R&D budget for the next cycle. I even took him out for lunch at our usual sushi spot, asked him about his new meditation routine. He thought he had time. That was his first mistake. While Damon enjoyed the illusion of control, Sasha and I were building the coffin. We updated the board's secure portal to reflect an upcoming confidential integrity audit, phrased vaguely enough not to raise suspicion, but authoritative enough to justify what was coming. Meanwhile, I set meetings with 3 of our major enterprise clients, personally assuring them of our product continuity and securing letters of intent, reaffirming their contracts with CoreSpan, not Atlas OS directly. It was subtle, invisible even. But it meant that when Damon tried to maneuver, the board, the revenue foundation he believed supported him, would already be in my hands. At home, I became a ghost. Celeste noticed, of course. I no longer stayed late at the office. I no longer asked questions about her exhibitions or travel plans. I simply withdrew, slept in the guest suite, dined alone. The distance suited her at first. She believed it was shame, weakness. She believed she had won. What she didn't see was that every morning while she scrolled through her curated world of gallery openings and espresso breakfasts, I was meeting with Sasha to engineer the perfect collapse. Every contingency planned, every clause activated, every channel secured. By the end of the 3rd week, we were ready. On a Wednesday morning in early spring, just before the quarterly board meeting Damon had been stacking with proxy allies, I filed the Article 9 trigger through internal counsel. Damon's access was revoked, his calendar wiped, his executive rights suspended pending internal review. Celeste's access to shared marital accounts was frozen via emergency injunction filed under risk of asset flight. The message was clear. They thought they were removing me, but they had only awakened the part of me that had built everything from nothing. Damon arrived at headquarters that afternoon, oblivious. He walked through the lobby, nodded to the receptionist, took the private elevator straight to the executive floor like he had every day for years. But this time his keycard didn't work. He tried again. Nothing. The security team had already been briefed. Calmly, professionally, they asked him to wait in the adjacent conference room while an internal audit matter was resolved. I watched on the security feed from my office, his confidence shifting to confusion. He still didn't know. That was the part that struck me. How long it takes for certainty to collapse. A man doesn't panic when the trap closes. He panics when he realizes it was built weeks before he ever saw the bait. I entered the room with a single folder in hand. Damon stood up fast, surprised. "Julian, what the hell's going on? Why is my access revoked?" I didn't answer right away. I placed the folder on the table between us and sat down. The silence was intentional. He broke first. "You've been acting strange for weeks," he said. I've been patient. But this? His tone was still half performance, as if he believed there was a version of this conversation where charm would work. I opened the folder, slowly, deliberately. Inside were copies of Slack transcripts, metadata timestamps, trust documents filed in offshore courts. He stared at the pages, flipping through them in silence. Then came the text message, printed in bold at the top of one sheet, sent from him to Celeste. He's too distracted. We can do this. The board will follow. His jaw tightened. This isn't what it looks like, he said. No, I replied calmly. It's exactly what it looks like. He sat down slowly, like the weight had just hit him. You don't understand, he muttered. We weren't trying to take it from you. We were just trying to protect the future. You were stretched, too thin, obsessed with control. The company needed a new direction. I let him talk. Let him spill his version of the narrative like it still held value. But when he was finished, I slid the final document toward him. The Article 9 invocation and a formal resolution passed by legal counsel under confidentiality breach. You've been suspended from Atlas OS effective immediately, I said. Your access is frozen, your voting rights are revoked. You are no longer an officer of this company. He leaned forward, voice low and sharp. This is a power grab. I nodded. Yes, and unlike yours, it's legal. He stood abruptly, knocking the chair back. You can't do this. The board will never go along with it. Celeste, I cut him off. Celeste's financial accounts have been frozen pending asset inquiry. Her attempt to redirect marital funds into foreign entities violates our prenuptial agreement. I'd advise her not to flee. That tends to trigger extradition complications. His face paled. Then came the final blow. Oh, and Damon? I added, reaching into the folder one last time. The patents you've been trying to leverage in the new shell company, they've been moved, licensed exclusively to a subsidiary, outside your reach. So even if you manage to crawl away from this, you'll be doing it with nothing. He didn't respond. He couldn't. The silence between us was no longer strategic. It was absolute. The partnership we'd once built on, trust was now a hollow construct, stripped bare by ambition and greed. I stood, collected the folder, and left the room. That was the last time I saw him in our office, and the first time I felt truly alone in something I had built from the ground up. The fallout began quietly, as these things often do. Damon left the building that day without saying a word to anyone. No final address, no spin. Just a man walking out of his own empire, carrying nothing but the weight of his own miscalculation. By the end of the week, internal memos had confirmed his suspension. I released a controlled statement, a temporary leadership restructure to maintain operational integrity. It was corporate language, calm, dry, and strategic, but every insider knew something seismic had happened. Word travels fast in Silicon Valley, especially when there's blood in the water. Damon's name started disappearing from upcoming speaker lineups and roundtables. A few private funders quietly pulled out of his stealth startup. One major VC firm leaked a vague statement about ethical misalignment, and that was all it took. Within days, he was radioactive. Celeste's unraveling was less immediate but more poetic. When she received the injunction notice freezing her accounts, she called me, once. I didn't answer. She sent an email the next morning, written in a tone that hovered between defensiveness and disbelief. This isn't what we meant to happen. We were trying to protect you from yourself. That line stuck with me, not because it hurt, but because it was so stunningly condescending. She believed even now that her betrayal was some noble intervention, but the law didn't care about her narrative. The prenup held, ironclad, surgically worded by the same legal team who had structured Atlas's first investor agreements. Her attempt to move joint assets into an offshore foundation was classified as willful breach. In simple terms, she forfeited all rights to any property acquired during the marriage. I offered her a settlement. Not out of mercy, but finality. She could keep the lake house and a modest fund to restart her life. Enough to disappear, not enough to rebuild a kingdom. Her lawyers tried to push for more. They threatened to drag things out, to go public. I sent them a folder of digital evidence, time-stamped chats, draft bank transfers, and surveillance, logs from the private security firm I had on retainer. The next morning they folded. She accepted the terms. While they tried to salvage their reputations, I was already at work protecting mine. I met personally with every major client, every key investor. I was transparent, controlled, and calm. I gave them what mattered most: certainty. The product roadmap stayed intact. The leadership shift was framed as a preemptive move to protect innovation. I reframed the betrayal not as a scandal but as a stress test. One the company had passed. Then came the twist. I made the stolen code open source. Every line of the AI prediction module Damon had tried to hide in his offshore venture. I released it to the public under a Creative Commons license. Overnight, his startup lost its edge. What had once been a proprietary breakthrough was now free. No patents, no paywalls. Just a gift to the developer community he had pretended to care about. In one move, I neutralized his leverage and elevated mine. Tech press called it a bold act of altruism. What it really was justice. From what I hear, Damon tried to get funding elsewhere, Asia, Eastern Europe. But the whispers followed him, not just about the code, about who he was, about the kind of man who betrays a friend and loses everything. He's still out there, I imagine, pitching, scrambling, living off what's left of a reputation that used to open any door. Celeste moved to Barcelona, bought a small flat under a different name. I suppose she thought Europe would forgive what California wouldn't. Last I heard, she was consulting for mid-tier galleries, her social currency drained, her Rolodex filled with disconnected numbers. And me? I was still standing. Not untouched, but unbroken. After the dust settled, I didn't celebrate. I recalibrated. Victory, if you can call it that, doesn't come with applause. It comes with silence, with space, with the kind of clarity you only earn when you've been through something that strips everything away except your will to continue. I kept Atlas OS, of course, but I no longer saw it as a fortress or a legacy. It was just a system, powerful, profitable, and no longer personal. I promoted 2 longtime engineers to co-CTOs, both people who had stood with me through every high and low, without once overstepping their boundaries or hiding behind charm. I gave them equity. Real equity. The kind that's earned, not negotiated, in shadows. More importantly, I started something new. I called it Lumora. A small think tank at first, focused on ethical tech, data sovereignty, and digital forensics. No board, no ego, just a handful of brilliant, under-the-radar minds solving real problems. We funded high school STEM programs in cities most VCs couldn't find on a map. We helped expose predatory tech practices in AI hiring platforms. And for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't just building. I was correcting. Redirecting. Some of the force I'd spent 2 decades amassing towards something that might actually matter beyond my name. I also reconnected with my son. Ethan was from my first marriage, back when I still believed balance was something you could schedule. He was studying applied mathematics in New York, working 2 jobs, refusing every offer of help I sent his way. He hadn't wanted to be the CEO's kid. I respected that. But one night, as I walked alone through the nearly empty Atlas OS main office, I saw a calendar alert on my phone. His birthday. I booked a flight, showed up unannounced, and took him to dinner at a quiet sushi place on the Lower East Side. Halfway through the meal, he put his chopsticks down and said, "You seem different." I nodded. "I am." He studied me for a second, then smiled. "You're finally dangerous for the right reasons." That stuck with me, not because it was clever, but because it was true. For years, I'd been a builder, a strategist, a technician. But now I was something else, measured, still precise, but no longer naive. That's what betrayal does. It burns away illusion, ego, entitlement. What's left is not weakness, it's armor, not made of steel, but of self-awareness. And with that, I started living differently. Not loudly, not for optics. Just clean. Real. Not everything broken needs to be rebuilt. Some things are better left behind. But the builder, that part of me never left. Power doesn't corrupt. It reveals. It shows you who around you is patient, who's loyal, and who's simply waiting. And when the masks fall, it also shows you who you are without applause, without affirmation, when you're stripped of comfort and left only with your principles. I learned the hard way that the greatest threats don't come from competitors. They come from proximity, from the people close enough to use your own tools, your own values, even your own love, against you. But I also learned something else. There is power in boundaries, in having clear lines between trust and access, between forgiveness and accountability. The people who betrayed me thought I'd fight with emotion, but emotion fades. Clarity does not. So build smart, document everything, and never confuse charm for character. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted with everything, what did you learn about yourself in the aftermath? Drop your story in the comments. You never know who it might help, or who needs to hear they're not alone. And if this story resonated with you, subscribe for more. We tell stories that dig deeper, that don't just entertain, but stay with you. Because sometimes the truth isn't just stranger than fiction, it's sharper.